establishing the legend of the king of the prison and the feared prisoner prisons are filled with some of the most dangerous and ruthless criminals the world has ever seen. Behind those thick concrete walls and steel bars, a new kind of hierarchy emerges, one that isn't governed by laws, but by raw power, fear, and brutality. Every prison has a leader, a dominant figure who commands respect, loyalty, and obedience. Among inmates, he is known as the king of the prison, a man whose rule is absolute, whose enemies disappear, and whose power even the guards fear to challenge. But in one of the world's most notorious maximum security prisons, a new nightmare was about to unfold. A prisoner unlike any other had arrived, one who didn't just challenge authority, but sought to destroy it. He wasn't just another criminal. He was a monster, a man with no fear, no remorse, and no limits to his violence. His reputation had preceded him, whispered among inmates like a ghost story. He was a killer of killers, a predator among predators. The king of this prison had ruled for years, his word law, his presence an unshakable force. He had survived countless assassination attempts, defeated every challenger, and built a network of loyal followers who would die for him. No one dared to cross him. But then, he met the one prisoner who would change everything. This man wasn't interested in alliances, negotiations, or power plays. He was here for one reason only, to take the throne in blood. From the moment he stepped into the prison yard, tension filled the air. The other inmates watched him carefully, whispering among themselves. Who was this man who walked with such confidence, who did not lower his gaze in the presence of the king's enforcers? Who was this killer who smirked when they tried to intimidate him? Word spread quickly. He had murdered some of the most dangerous men outside these walls. His hands were stained with the blood of those who once ruled the streets. Now, he was in their world, but he wasn't looking for survival. He was looking for war. The prison king had dealt with threats before, but this time, something was different. This wasn't just another ambitious prisoner looking to climb the ranks. This man didn't want power. He wanted chaos. The guards sensed it too. They had seen thousands of criminals come and go, but this one was something else. There was a darkness in his eyes, a silent promise of violence waiting to erupt. It was only a matter of time before the inevitable happened. The prison king and the feared prisoner were on a collision course, a battle that would shake the prison to its very foundations. One of them would not survive, and when the dust settled, the prison would never be the same again. How power dynamics work. Inside the prison and why the king ruled. Inside prison, survival isn't just about serving time. It's about understanding the rules of the underworld that exist within the walls. There are no police to protect the weak, no justice system to enforce order. Instead, power belongs to those who can take it and keep it. And at the top of this brutal hierarchy sits one man, the king of the prison, the unwritten rules of prison power. Every maximum security prison has a social structure, an invisible government run by the inmates themselves. It's a world where only the strongest, smartest, and most ruthless survive. At the bottom of the chain are the newcomers, the fresh meat. They arrive with fear in their eyes, unaware of the rules that will decide their fate. If they don't align with a group or prove their worth, they become easy targets, forced into servitude, beaten, or worse. Above them are the gangs, groups that provide protection but demand loyalty. These gangs control everything from contraband smuggling to prison economics. Drugs, weapons, favors, everything has a price, and nothing moves without their approval. Then, there are the enforcers, the king's right-hand men. These are the prisoners who maintain his rule, carrying out orders with brutal efficiency. If someone disrespects the king or breaks the hierarchy, the enforcers handle it. Violence is swift, public, and meant to send a message. No one challenges the king and lives. At the very top sits the king of the prison, the most feared, respected, and powerful man behind bars. He doesn't just rule with strength. He rules with fear, intelligence, and influence. He knows who to pay off, which guards to manipulate, and which enemies to crush before they can rise against him. Why the king ruled? The king wasn't just the strongest man in the yard, he was the smartest. He had survived countless battles, taken out rivals before they became threats, and built an empire inside the walls. He controlled the flow of contraband, deciding who got what and who went without. He dictated alliances, forcing other gangs to either serve him or suffer. He had eyes and ears everywhere, ensuring no one could plot against him without him knowing first. Even the guards respected him, some even working with him for their own gain. For years, this system remained unshaken. Every challenge was met with blood and terror. Any prisoner who thought they could take his place was broken and humiliated. His reign seemed absolute. But then came the new prisoner, the one who didn't follow the rules. Unlike the others, this man wasn't interested in surviving under the king's rule. He didn't care about alliances, respect, or even control. He wanted destruction. And for the first time in years, the prison king felt something he hadn't felt before. Fear. Prisons have seen their fair share of monsters, men who have committed unspeakable crimes, whose names are whispered in fear. But this man was different. He wasn't just another criminal, he was a force of nature. When he arrived at the prison gates, shackled from head to toe, the guards looked uneasy. It wasn't just his crime history that made him terrifying, it was the way he carried himself, his cold, dead stare, his unsettling silence, the aura of violence that clung to him like a shadow. The other inmates had heard the rumors long before they saw him. He had killed men without hesitation. He had torn through entire gangs on the outside. He was said to be unbreakable, a man who didn't fear death, only boredom. And now he was here. The crimes that made him a legend. His story was one that made even the most hardened criminals uneasy. Unlike others who had fallen into a life of crime due to desperation or bad choices, he had chosen violence. His first kill, at just 15. Not out of anger, not out of self-defense, but just to see what it felt like. By the time he was 18, he had already earned a reputation as a ghost, a man who moved through the underworld with precision and efficiency. No hesitation, no remorse. He killed for money, for power, for sport. His most infamous crime was the massacre of an entire gang, a group that had once ruled the streets. In one night, he wiped them out. No survivors, no witnesses, only bodies left as a message. When the police finally caught him, they thought it was over. They believed that locking him away would stop the nightmare. They couldn't have been more wrong. The monster enters the prison. The moment he stepped inside, the balance of power shifted. The other inmates watched from a distance, whispering among themselves. Who was this man? The guards, trained to handle the most violent criminals, treated him differently. They never turned their backs on him. They kept their hands near their weapons whenever he passed. But the true test came in the prison yard. The king's enforcers approached him, expecting obedience, expecting submission. But he did something no one had ever done before. He laughed. Then, without warning, he struck first. 2 men were on the ground before anyone could react. Bones shattered, blood pooled on the concrete. And just like that, the message was clear. He wasn't here to obey. He wasn't here to survive. He was here to conquer. The prison king had ruled for years, but for the first time, he saw a real threat. A predator that wasn't afraid of him. And the monster was just getting started. The brutal murder of the prison king and how it changed everything. For years, the prison king had ruled unchallenged. His word was law, and his power was absolute. No one had ever dared to stand against him. Until now. From the moment the monster arrived, tension filled the air. He wasn't just another challenger. He was a different breed of predator. The prison king saw it in his eyes. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a cold certainty. A storm was coming. The prison had been on edge for weeks. The enforcers had tried to break him, sending warnings, attacking in numbers. None of it worked. Every attempt only proved what the rumors had said. This man couldn't be stopped. And then one night, the inevitable happened. The final confrontation. The prison king knew that if he didn't act, his reign would end in humiliation. He had only one choice, eliminate the threat before it consumed him. He called for a meeting in the showers, a place with no cameras, no guards to interfere, just blood and concrete. His enforcers surrounded the monster as he walked in, blocking every exit. 6 men, all armed. "You don't belong here," the king said. "This is my prison." The monster simply smiled. The king had made a mistake. He thought numbers would save him. The fight was over before it even started. 1. The first enforcer lunged. The monster sidestepped and drove his fist into his throat. A sickening crunch. He collapsed, gasping for air. 2. Another came from behind. The monster spun and slammed his head into the tile wall. A shower head snapped, water mixing with blood. 3, 4, 5. Each one fell in seconds, bones shattering, screams cut short. Then it was just him and the king. The prison king had fought countless battles, but this wasn't a fight. This was an execution. The monster closed the distance, dodging a desperate swing. One punch to the ribs, another to the jaw. The king staggered back, eyes wide with something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. The monster grabbed him by the throat, lifted him off the ground, and whispered, "Your time is up." Then he drove a sharpened toothbrush into the king's neck. Blood sprayed across the tiles. The king gasped, his body convulsing. His hands clawed at his throat, but it was useless. His rule was over. As the life drained from his eyes, the monster stepped back and watched, unmoved, unshaken. Then he turned to the stunned inmates who had witnessed the slaughter, and with a voice as cold as death, he said, "I run this prison now." Everything changed that night. The guards found the body an hour later. The king was dead. The hierarchy collapsed. The old order was gone. Fear had a new name. And the monster, he wasn't done yet. How he planned and executed the most daring prison break. With the prison king dead, the balance of power shifted overnight. The monster had taken his throne, ruling with fear and violence. No one dared challenge him. Even the guards watched him differently, like they knew he was something beyond their control. But power wasn't his goal. Freedom was. From the moment he arrived, he had studied the prison like a predator stalking its prey. Every hallway, every schedule, every guard rotation. He wasn't just surviving, he was calculating. And now, with the chaos of the king's murder still fresh, it was time to make his move. Step 1. The inside man. Brute strength alone wouldn't get him out. He needed an opening. One of the guards, a man drowning in gambling debt, was desperate. The monster had been watching him for weeks, waiting for the right moment. And when the guard's desperation peaked, he made his offer, "You get me out, and your debt disappears." The guard hesitated, until the monster reminded him of the consequences of refusal. People who owed the monster never lived long. The deal was made. Step 2. The distraction. He knew security would be tight. He needed chaos. The night of the escape, he triggered a prison riot. A single whispered order to the gang still reeling from the king's death, and the prison erupted into violence. Fires burned, guards were overwhelmed, alarms blared. Perfect. Step 3. The execution. As the riot spread, the monster moved. Every second counted. The guard had left a maintenance door unlocked, one that led to a blind spot in the security cameras, a gap of exactly 90 seconds. He slipped through, moving like a ghost. Down the corridor, past the unguarded checkpoint, everything was timed to perfection. But there was one last obstacle, the outer wall. Step 4. The impossible climb. The wall was 40 feet high, topped with razor wire. Unclimbable, unless you had a plan. The monster had spent weeks stealing small pieces of metal from the workshop, crafting them into makeshift climbing spikes. A rope made from shredded bed sheets, hidden inside a maintenance tunnel. With inhuman precision, he scaled the wall as alarms blared behind him. A spotlight swept past. He froze, body pressed against the cold concrete. Then, in one final motion, He flipped over the top and dropped into the darkness beyond. Step 5. Vanishing into the night. The guards found the riot still raging. By the time they checked the cameras, it was too late. The monster was gone. No footprints, no clues, nothing. For years, no one knew where he went. Some say he disappeared into the underworld. Others say he's still out there, watching, waiting. But one thing is certain. He was never meant to be caged.